in Judges 13. The Israelites, again, did evil in the Lord's sight. So the Lord handed them over to the Philistines 40 years. There was a certain man from Zorah, from the family of Dan, whose name was Manoah. His wife was unable to conceive and had no children. The angel of the Lord appeared to the woman and said to her, "Although you are unable to conceive and have no children, you will conceive and give birth to a son. Now please be careful not to drink wine or beer or to eat anything unclean, for indeed you will conceive and give birth to a son. You must never cut his hair, because the boy will be a Nazirite to God from birth, and he will begin to save Israel from the power of the Philistines." So I know a number of you probably already have an idea who we're talking about today and what this story is, but just from that, talking about it being a Nazirite. But just a quick question, what is a Nazirite? There's making a point here in this that he's going to be a Nazirite. This son is going to be born. It's going to be a Nazirite, so it's obviously key to some of this idea. Yeah.
I'm not the expert in this, but Nazirite insurance is taking a religious vow. And normally not cut their hair for the duration of this vow.
Yeah. So if anybody can't hear, it's just talking about that a Nazirite is somebody that's taken a religious vow of some sort. It can be different things, and often doesn't cut their hair, or there's some outward sign about what that means, so people know that he does. So what would be the significance if you're taking a religious vow for something? What would be the significance of him being a Nazirite from birth?
Well, obviously someone else took the vow for him.
Somebody took the vow for him, yeah.
I think normally that person would decide to do that for themselves. But yeah, devoted to the Lord, like Alan said, it seems like, I don't really know a lot about the Nazarite vow, but it seems like it was maybe for a finite period of time normally. Being a Nazarite from birth, yeah, it's forever, it sounds like.
So what are some vows that we do now? Wedding vow? Yeah, a lot of us do that. That's right. Baptism is a good one.
You're called into courts and you're asked to swear an oath that you're going to tell the truth. So in a way, that's sort of a vow. It's a little bit different than what you're talking about.
Well, but
Saying you're going to do something a certain way.
yeah, but it's a vow. That's right. In court, so you're vowing to tell the truth. That's right. Yeah.
And you enter into a contract, whether it's to pay a car loan or to get work done on your house, whatever, but you're making a vow that you're going to honor your end of that contract.
Yeah. So any kind of contract, that's a vow. That's right. So there's a lot of things in our lives that we do vows. How about if you say to yourself, or you say to God, I'm going to come to church. Part of the baptism part. But coming to church. Or, there's a lot of things in our lives where we make vows. Life is a finite time. Yeah.
Another kind of vow, if you will, are New Year's resolutions. And that's almost a joke in our society.
The New Year's resolutions. Yeah.
Well, how many hours did you keep the resolution?
Yeah, that's right.
But we don't always keep the promises we make.
So are some vows more important than others? So you're saying, yeah.
I would say no.
Why is that?
The Bible says you should always have your yeses be yes and your no's be no. So if you take vows, it should be just as important as what a vow is.
Yeah. So it may be a vow to the bank, it may be a vow to God, but it's still you giving your word, so you take that seriously.
I agree completely. And Jesus made a distinction. He says, if you make a vow and you swear by the temple, you might. But if you make a vow to God, you keep that vow. So I may make several vows and have contracts all over the place and New Year's resolutions and other things. But if I swear to God, I have a job to go there to keep that vow.
So God's going to hold us accountable if we make a vow to him. I think I saw two hands here.
Yeah, Alice's comment, I think, is really key where the Bible covenant was, and it says, just, don't swear, just let your yes be yes, if you say you're going to do something, do it, follow through. If you're not, you're not. It's interesting since you bring this up. You remember there was a story about Paul, the apostle, had kicked off some Jews, and so there were 40 people who had taken a vow that they would not eat or drink until they had essentially assassinated Paul. And that didn't happen, so I've often wondered did those guys keep their vow? And did they end up being the ones that, died from it? Anyway, it's a funny story, but at the same time, I like that we are underscoring the idea that if we say we're going to do something, we need to do it. And we all realize that sometimes we fall through instead of follow through. And it's just a good reminder for us of what it is to yes and no.
Well, and taking it seriously and understanding, which is like what both of you are saying, take it seriously before you take that vow. Know what you're saying and be true to it. Yeah.
Both of those kind of go into what I was thinking of as far as semantics. If, for example, I say, I want to lose weight with my New Year's resolution, is that a vow? Or is it a good intention? But if you make a vow to someone, you're honor bound and holy. You make a vow to God, you're going to take it spiritually. So I think some of it is the intent. You can always argue, well, you said you do this, well, I don't intend that as, and that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about if I say something to myself, I want to do this, or I intend to do this, it's different than I vow, I will stay with this person for life. Or, things like that, where I vow to God, I'm going to life. It's quite different.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So with my, those are all very good thoughts for everybody. So with our opening verses here in Judges, obviously we're talking about Samson, and he didn't take the vow. Somebody took it for him that he was going to be a Nazirite from birth. And yet that was still a vow to God. And God honored that. As we see throughout the story, he did have great strength. And Samson is considered to be one of the judges of Israel. So he's in that list of judges. So there's going to be a number of judges that we look at and what they do. But we think in terms of judges being, they're going to have that big desk and the bench and everything, and you come and you bring things to them. But is that always what judges do in the Bible? We use the word judges, but it has, it does something different. A lot of times that's somebody that's there to rescue Israel. There's a purpose for what they do. And so there's some different looks at that. So I'm going to back up a little bit. We're reading in Judges. So obviously I'm going to say, let's look at Exodus. And so we're not going to read a whole lot there. But who's somebody else that was a leader and somebody that rescued Israel? That would be Moses, of course. And I don't know that we consider Moses specifically to be a judge, but there's a lot of similarities to what he had done with that. So if we're looking at in Exodus chapter 3, starting in verse 11. And this is where we see with these judges, I should back up just a little bit. So with the judges, were they perfect people? I've already mentioned Samson. Was Samson perfect? A very quick nose over here. It's obviously had flaws, but they were real people. And so let's back up just a little bit. Take a look at Moses. Exodus 3, starting in verse 11. But Moses said to God, "Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt?" And God said, "I will be with you, and this will be the sign that to you that it is I who have sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you will stand with me on this, and worship God on this mountain." So when God is giving Moses that directive, he kind of questions a little bit. Well, who am I? You're telling me to go to Pharaoh. Yeah, but can I do that? So let's jump forward a little bit to Exodus chapter 4, starting in verse 1. So that dialogue continued, and then we come to this in chapter 4. Moses answered, "What if they do not believe me or listen to me and say, 'The Lord did not appear to you'?" Then the Lord said to him, What is that in your hand?" "A staff," he replied. The Lord said, "Throw it on the ground." Moses threw it on the ground, and it became a snake, and he ran from it. Then the Lord said to him, "Reach out your hand and take it by the tail." So Moses reached out and took hold of the snake, and it turned back into the staff in his hand. "This," said the Lord, "is so that they may believe that the Lord, the God of their fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob, has appeared to you." Then the Lord said to him, "Put your hand inside your cloak." So Moses put his hand into his cloak, and when he took it out, the skin was leprous, and it had become as white as snow. "Now put it back into your cloak," he said. So Moses put his hand back in his cloak, and when he took it out, it was restored, like the rest of his flesh. Then the Lord said, "If they do not believe you or pay attention to the first sign, they may believe the second. But if they do not believe these two signs or listen to you, take some water." And so he continues on, and there's another sign. And so there's this whole dialogue, basically God kind of convincing Moses, because Moses is concerned people aren't going to follow him and they're not going to listen to him. So there's this whole dialogue that goes on for several more verses that goes through that. And then in verse 13, so this is chapter 4, verse 13. But Moses said, "Pardon your servant, Lord. Please send someone else." He just did the snake. He just had the leper's hand, had that healed. He just had water turned into blood. He just gave Moses these signs, and then he's like, "Pardon me, can you send somebody else?" Very questioning with that. And obviously that went through, and of course we know a lot of the story with Moses, that he did end up going and brought the people of Israel out of Egypt. But he questioned them. So we think of Moses now, as being a strong, wonderful leader for Israel. Not perfect, but he did wonderful, marvelous things in a horrible, hard time that he did. But he questioned, and he had to get convinced. God had to convince him. No, it just didn't take God by his word. And yet we'd think of him as being a wonderful leader. So, sorry, Al, go ahead.
This instance, I'm reminded that God was very patient with Moses. Moses said, "Well, what if?" And God says, "Well then." And he did the what if, well then thing. So they got to the point where Moses, "God,
And yet he still worked with Moses. Yeah, Moses essentially told him no, he had to be convinced. And he still worked with Moses because Moses was the right one. So let's jump over to Judges chapter 6. This is a section talking about Gideon. So Gideon, one of the great judges. Judges chapter 6, starting in verse 1. And I'm going to jump around just a little bit on this one. Verses 1 through 5. The Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord, and for 7 years he gave them into the hands of the Midianites. Because the power of the Midian was so oppressive, the Israelites prepared shelters for themselves in mountain clefts, caves, and strongholds. They had to abandon their cities, a lot of them. They were hiding. They were hiding out. It was so bad. Whenever the Israelites planted their crops, the Midianites, the Amalekites, and other eastern peoples invaded the country. They camped on the land and ruined the crops all the way to Gaza and did not spare a living thing for Israel, neither sheep nor cattle nor donkeys. They came up with their livestock and their tents like swarms of locusts. It was impossible to count them, or their camels. They invaded the land to ravage it. So Israel's having a horrible time with the invasions right then. So with that situation, let's jump forward to verse 11. The angel of the Lord came and sat down under an oak in Ophrah that belonged to Joash, the Abiezrite, where his son Gideon was threshing wheat in a winepress to keep it from the Midianites. So even when they did their wine, they had to hide it. See, he was inside to thresh, preparing the wheat in order so the Midianites wouldn't find it. When the angel of the Lord appeared to Gideon, he said, "The Lord is with you, mighty warrior." In verse 13, "Pardon me, my Lord," Gideon replied, "but if the Lord is with us, why has all this happened to us? Where are all his wonders that our ancestors told us about when they said, did not the Lord bring us up out of Egypt? But now the Lord has abandoned us and given us into the hand of Midian." The Lord turned to him and said, "Go in strength and and save Israel out of the Midian's hands. Am I not sending you?" Verse 15. "Pardon me, my Lord," Gideon replied, "but how can I save Israel? My clan is the weakest in Manasseh, and I am the least of my family." So Gideon's having to be convinced. So, pardon me, but how can this be? So if we jump forward to verse 36. Gideon said to God, "If you will save Israel by my hand as you have promised, look, I will place a wool fleece on the threshing floor. If there is dew only on the fleece and all the ground is dry, then I will know that you will save Israel by my hand." And that goes on asking for a sign, and it goes on for a bit after that. So even after these, Gideon is continuing to have to be convinced. God's having to give him specific signs, and he has to give another sign, then he has to give him another sign. And Gideon was a great leader, he was a great judge. But he was afraid. What's that? Yeah. Yeah, like Joshua as well. So let's jump over to Judges chapter 11. And starting in verse 30. And Jephthah, one of the great judges, he made a vow to the Lord, "If you give the Ammonites into my hands, Whatever comes out of the door of my house to meet me when I return in triumph from the Ammonites will be the Lord's, and I will sacrifice it as a burnt offering." Then Jephthah went out to fight the Ammonites, and the Lord gave them into his hands. He devastated 20 towns from Arar to the vicinity of Minnith, as far as Abel-Kiriam, or however you pronounce that. Thus Israel subdued Ammon. When Jephthah returned to his home in Mizpah, who should come out to meet him but his daughter, dancing to the sound of timbrels? She was an only child. Except for her, he had neither son nor daughter. When he saw her, he tore his clothes and cried, "Oh no, my daughter! You have brought me down, and I am devastated. I have made a vow to the Lord that I cannot break." And then that story continues. So Jephthah wasn't necessarily questioning God, but when he made that vow, and he knew he couldn't do it because he was a man of honor, and he knew you don't break vows to God, that's serious. Whew. Be careful what you vow. Take it seriously. We look at that being a foolish vow. I don't know, as a parent, I choke up now, just thinking of this. So moving back to Samson. So this is Samson's Judges starting in chapter 13 and goes through 16. We're not going to read all of the chapters of that. Our vows are important. And not all the judges that we see that are described in the Bible as being great leaders, great judges, great followers of God, they're certainly not perfect. So how does that relate to us?
We're certainly not perfect.
We're not perfect. So do you think that when you see these judges, these great leaders, and they make mistakes, and God works with them anyway, does that give us license to say, well, I'm not perfect, I'm okay. I'm going to be okay. I don't need to worry about trying to be perfect or always doing the right thing or not honoring my vows, because God's going to work with me anyway because I've been baptized. I'm a Christian. That makes it okay, right? I see a no. Oh, not on this one. And actually, if you speak up just a little bit so we can hear you.
After chapter 5, he says it's not okay to, in old time it was, but he says, "But I say you swear not to all neither by heaven, because it is God's throne, nor by earth, because it's his footstool, neither by Jerusalem, where is the city of the great king. Neither shall you swear by your head, because you can't make any hair grow, neither black or white, but let your communication be yes or no. Because whatever is more than these comes evil." You can't control the mouth and say, "I will do this, I will do that." You might not be able to. And we have the consequences of the results of not being able to do it.
Yeah. Go ahead.
So a couple of these vows that strike me, the one that you just read where his daughter came out. And so he's making a vow and offering himself personally, he's making a vow that involves another person. The birth of Samson, a vow was made concerning another person and not personally for himself. So I wonder about the leadership for churches. Are leaders in a position to make vows
Save money.
But it gets my wonderment in this, making a vow personally seems to be quite different than making a vow that involves other people. And people in leadership, judges or elders, if they make vows, or should they make vows concerning other people? Just a wonderment that's in my mind. I've always been troubled, very troubled, by the scripture where his daughter ran out, and then his heart was pierced. And as a parent, I think, would he have been less concerned if it had been the lowliest servant in his household? That he would have said, oh, what a relief. Just a wonderment.
Yeah, it's a lot of food for thought there. Yeah. The vows are obviously quite serious, but do you take vows for other people? We have some examples here that God honors those vows taken for other people. So there must be some kind of ability and authority to be able to do that from these examples, but you definitely need to take them very seriously. Samson's mother took that vow for him to be a Nazirite from birth. And obviously that was taken very seriously and it played out. Did it mean that he was going to be perfect? Well, obviously not. From a lot of things that he did and chose to do. Yeah.
Another footnote to that, Samson obviously knew about the vow that was made in his behalf, and he was honorable to that. And his daughter knew the vow that was made on her behalf, and she honored that too and submitted herself to have her life taken from her.
Mm-hmm.
Just a footnote on those kinds of things. Submissiveness of the recipient.
Well, and I think that's an example of taking those vows to God seriously. His daughter submitted to that willingly because that was a vow to God, and that's what you do. So obviously she had some type of relationship. Yeah.
I think it's telling also that they're supposed to be studying, learning the Torah. And it says that there are several places, no human sacrifices. But if you pledge whatever walks out of your, or comes out of your door first, well, it's either going to be the dog or one of the people. That's a 50-50 shot. So, you don't understand that we're not supposed to be doing human sacrifices? Or did you miss that section of the class, or what happened? And I've always argued that with my ancestors. How is it that every 40 years you forget to read the book? When you were taught, you were supposed to be using the book strictly for teaching to read.
Mm-hmm.
But every 40 years, it happened.
Yeah, it gets set aside. Yeah. So, in the New Testament, we're also given, a story of a prominent birth with Jesus. So a young virgin named Mary conceives and gives birth to Jesus, and he's the true chosen one. Excuse me. So, like Samson, Jesus also dies tragically, although he was innocent. I don't know that you would say that Samson was innocent, when he died. Was he a good example of things to do for God? Yes, but I don't know we'd say he's innocent. So Jesus died and rose again for just to save sinners. That's all of us. And all those who repent of their sin and trust him alone for salvation receive forgiveness. So, what are some ways that we express or can express our gratitude for Jesus' miraculous birth, his sacrificial death, and his victorious resurrection? What are some ways that we can express gratitude toward that? We don't necessarily express gratitude towards Samson doing what he did, But with Jesus, we do. And obviously, very different relationship there with Jesus. But what are some ways that we express or can express our gratitude? Keep my commandments. So if I say I'm going to keep his commandments, is that a vow?
There's an attitude that comes with giving thanks also, that whenever there's bad things in lunch, I always find that when I start my prayers with thanks and appreciation, that whatever is going on seems a little less of a factor. And I think that there's a mindset that goes on with being thankful and sure that
Vows are a tricky thing, and every time I'm trying to do that, but it really do a house of my own or anything. But I'm saying we're going to try to make it.
Yeah, the vows are taken seriously. What does the bank do if you stop making that payment? Yeah. So, we talked about that earlier as far as is the vow to God more important than the vow to the bank? Well, it's different, but it's still you giving your word. How do you live, and how are we supposed to live like that? So, what are some ways that God uses us despite our flaws? Today, how does God use us? How does he use us here in Corvallis today, despite our flaws?
We have multiple ministries that do good to people around us, not just the ones in-house.
Yeah, so looking out at the community, how can you serve the community? Yeah.
Just saying, taking a sinful, broken creature that has no light in themselves, but using them to shine the light of Christ to everybody around them.
So you hear it said, and we hear different examples of it, for a number of years, but it seems like it's getting more prevalent. I don't belong in a church. I'm not the type of person that goes to church, and I'm not good enough to be there. What does that tell you? What does that tell you when somebody's got that attitude? And is it a right attitude? I need to make things right before I come to church.
It's
Yeah.
wrong.
It's a wrong
You need
attitude.
to come right now. Fall on your face before the throne. Unburden yourself. Let Jesus take care of you.
Yeah, see, so coming here is going to help unburden you. Yeah, so there's a reason for that. So,
Not here, but to the throne.
right, yeah.
Yeah, I remember witnessing to an elderly lady about Christ, and she received the Lord on that day, and it was a joyous event. And then I asked her if she'd like to begin to attend church. And she told me that she didn't have good enough clothing to wear to church. Her clothing was what she envisioned people who wore to church. But then church needs to rethink how it's going to reach out by not thinking that we need to draw people into the church building, but to go where they are and to sit with them where they are until they are ready to come to where the church is. And I find that the busy lives of people, the friendship networks that they already have, and they just say, I don't have any time for any more friends or any more commitments. Because it is a huge commitment to go one-on-one in discipleship and to hang with that person for long enough to where they become a spiritual adult and can stand on their own 2 feet. That's a huge commitment. But I've come to the conclusion that's what the church needs in our day and age, to have effective outreach and effective evangelism and winning souls for Christ. It's a different world that we live in. People aren't going to just accept, very rarely, but occasionally, but mostly not, accept an invitation to come to church.
Well, and of course, it's having that thought pattern that this building is not the church. That's not the church. It's the people, and it's valuing those people, like you're saying, Jennifer.
I think I really agree with the fact that we need to change the way we, appear, or our expectations of other people. I think I'm going to say that. I mean, I've traveled around to so many different congregations, and I know that there is a traditional understanding that you come to church and you are dressed to your best, and you act a certain way, you sit a certain way, I know that there is a tradition of that, and that is one of the things that keeps people away, because they don't feel like they can live up to that, I don't feel comfortable in a suit, I don't have the nice clothes, I even one time had someone sit next to me and criticize someone who was sitting on the second row, thinking, what is she doing there, just wanting to be seen by everybody? That was not the person sitting up front's fault. That was the person who was looking at them and judging them. And we need to honestly be thinking about, the first century church, did they have an understanding that everybody was going to come to church looking their best? Quite the opposite. It even talked about how, if somebody comes in looking this way, they don't get preferential treatment. So I just really think that we need to make sure that if you want to dress your best, if you want to sit in a certain spot, do it because you are doing that in your heart to honor God. But don't do it to be seen by men, and don't expect other people to follow a certain standard. We want to encourage every single person to be honoring God in their own way. And if, frankly, dressing up gets in the way of honoring God, then you should come in more subtle clothing, I guess, or because I know that for women especially, women spend a lot of time sometimes when they get dressed up, and then sometimes we wonder, are we looking nice enough? Are people, and that can get in the way of worship. So maybe it's better to come simple. And I don't know, I just think that we need to really examine our hearts and not put our judgments on other people, because outsiders see that, and outsiders see that when you say it's my heart, but then you want me to make sure that I wear a suit and tie, or that I don't look so rough when I come in. I just think we need to be really careful and examine our hearts and try and change that about ourselves.
No, I'd agree, and that's something that's Pat was talking about this a moment ago. It's person to person. It's those relationships, and it's how do we communicate that. So whether it's them coming through that door at this building because they're coming to meet with us for whatever reason they decided to come that first time, or whether I'm meeting with them out on the street somewhere, it's still that personal relationship. And how do I represent that? Do I honor my vows? Do I, all of these things, how do I live my life so they see that power from God Or do they see that I've got the same foul language that everybody else does? It's like, oh, whatever, Sunday morning, right? Like, I see how they are all week. So it's not a matter of keeping up appearances for the sake of keeping up appearances, but how we do relate to other people is important. And the people we're talking to are not perfect either out in the community, so they will be judgmental. And they will assume things that are not necessarily correct. Oh, the people in the church building, they're all perfect. I'm not that good. We all know that that's not correct. We all know that we're not perfect, and that's why we're here. But it's our relationships. How do we communicate those people come through the door so they understand that? It doesn't matter that that person on the second row is all dressed up and sitting up on the second row, but that's not who that person is as far as they're trying to be showy. That's just another person that's there. And so it's a matter of how do we communicate that? That's not easy, especially when somebody comes in and we've got a very short amount of contact with them and then they're gone. What opportunity did you have so that they see that? I don't know. That's not an easy answer. Not an easy answer to that. But that's something certainly for us as far as how do we communicate that to our community so that they understand, you know what, this is for them too, just as much it is for me. This is for them. So how do I communicate it? How do I live in such a way that they see that they trust that? So I think one comment here, and then we're right at time. So one comment, and then I've just got one thing to finish.
Back to the concept of vows. Most people who do discipleship today as a professional organization, Campus Crusade for Christ, or some of these kind of organizations, they realize that to disciple someone to where they can stand on their own 2 feet with Christ takes 3 years. Now, am I ready to make a vow to someone that I will walk with you as a brother in Christ for that length of time? Wow, most of us can't, make a vow. Let me not say most of us. I struggle to make a vow past 30 days. Okay? And 3 years, am I going to be committed to this person to walk with them, meet with them weekly, maybe twice a week, for 3 years where they come to that place? That's a pretty heavy duty vow, and it needs a great deal of thought, and it needs a great deal of follow through.
Yeah, so if God, it's a good thought. And if God is calling us to live this way and to follow him this way, then shouldn't I be willing to make that a 3-year commitment or whatever? Because this is lifetime. So 3 years is actually shorter than that. Doesn't mean it's easy. Doesn't mean that we're perfect by any means. And so just a final thought here is, God is able to bring salvation to his people, despite us. He even works through the weaknesses that we have, that these judges had, that we were reading about earlier. He works through their weaknesses in order to deliver the chosen. So if we're the chosen, and there's other people in the community that we can help teach and draw them in to follow that narrow path as well. I'm flawed. But you know what? God can use me. So it's not stepping back and say, well, this is so that the preacher can do it because the preacher's got it all together. Well, I don't think there's any preachers that are going to tell you they've got it all together. They've got a lot of good stuff that they do, but to say they've got it all together, that's a different thing. Or every song leader that comes up here, man, they've got it going on. Boy, they're just, look at how they can worship and do the singing and everything else. They're not perfect. God doesn't expect us to be perfect. God expects us to follow and to work for him, and God will work with it. So in your own lives, don't beat yourself up over being not perfect. You want to work at, where do I go from here? This is where I am right now. Where do I go? God will send me. if I'm willing to listen, if I'm willing to follow. And that's class. Thank you for coming, everybody.